For thousands and thousands of years, the story of the Sumerians was just gone, buried deep under the sands of what we now call Iraq. Until the 1800s, nobody even knew they existed. Then archaeologists start digging, and what they find is just mind-blowing. Ruins of enormous cities, strange clay tablets covered in this wedge-shaped writing, incredible artifacts. They had literally stumbled upon one of humanity's first ever civilizations. And in doing that, they found a kind of blueprint for how to build a world from the ground up.
What they unearthed was this incredible story of how a group of people solved one life-threatening problem after another to create something the world had never seen before. And it forces us to ask this really huge question: how do you build a civilization from scratch? Well, we're going to follow the clues the Sumerians left behind and find out together.
Okay, so first things first, we have to understand the setting. And let me tell you, this was not an easy place to live. The southern part of Mesopotamia, it's basically this big flat plain between two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. It had almost no rain, a scorching hot sun, and very few natural resources like trees or stone. It was a seriously hostile environment that threw a whole set of challenges at you.
In fact, when you boil it down, historians have identified 4 major problems the Sumerians had to solve just to survive. And here's the crazy part. Solving each of these problems, one by one, turned out to be the exact steps they needed to take on their journey from a few scattered villages to the world's first great city-states.
It all kicked off with the first problem, a food shortage. See, around 5000 BCE, life up in the foothills of the Zagros Mountains was pretty good for a farmer. You had mild weather, lots of rain, but they got a little too successful. The population grew so much that there just wasn't enough land to feed everybody. So they made a super risky choice. They moved down onto those barren plains, a place with hard, dry soil and almost no rain. But, and this is a big but, it held one incredible promise: the super fertile soil left behind after the river floods.
But moving to the plains led them smack into the second problem. The water supply was completely out of control. In the spring, snowmelt from the mountains would make the rivers flood like crazy, washing away all their crops. Then, for the rest of the year, the sun would just bake the earth solid. It was either total flood or total drought. There was no in-between.
So, they invented a solution, and honestly, it's a technological masterpiece that changed everything. They created the irrigation system. It was this brilliant 3-part setup. First, they built levees, which are basically raised banks of dirt, to hold back the floodwaters. Next, they dug canals to channel that river water exactly where they wanted it, out to their fields. And finally, they created reservoirs to store all that water for the long, hot, dry months. And just like that, for the first time, they had a stable, reliable source of water.
But here's an unintended consequence, something they probably didn't see coming. This amazing invention created their third problem. You see, a huge system of canals gets clogged with silt and needs constant upkeep. One person's laziness could block the water for everyone downstream. So the technology itself forced these villages to start working together. They couldn't be little isolated farming communities anymore. They were all connected. And that forced cooperation, it had a massive ripple effect. Between 3500 and 3000 BCE, as everyone worked together to manage the water, villages started to merge and grow. They became bigger towns, and then the first real cities, some with thousands and thousands of people. They were getting bigger, more powerful, and way more complex.
But success, as it often does, brought them to their fourth and final problem: conflict. As these cities got bigger, they started fighting with each other over who had the rights to the water. A city upriver could just decide to build a dam and cut off the water supply, starving out a city downriver. And with no natural barriers like mountains or forests to protect them, these new, wealthy cities became really tempting targets for raiders.
Their solution was simple and brilliant: defense. They figured out how to bake mud into hard bricks and use them to build these massive protective walls all the way around their cities. They even dug moats, big ditches filled with water, for an extra layer of security. Now, if an enemy attacked, farmers could run inside the walls for safety. And with that, the transformation was complete. Their cities weren't just settlements anymore. They were independent, protected fortresses. They had become city-states.
So just by solving the basic problems of survival, they had built something stable, something secure. But what was it exactly? Was it just a bunch of safe towns, or had they created something more? Well, to answer that, we can look at what historians consider the key ingredients of a true civilization.
The big idea here is that a civilization isn't just about not dying. It's about building a society with art and science and organization. It's about having a distinct culture. It's really the moment a society starts to create, not just endure. So, let's run Sumer through the checklist and see how they did.
First on the list, a stable food supply. Oh yeah, that's a definite check. Their irrigation system plus another game-changing invention, the plow, meant they could grow way more food than they needed. This food surplus is the absolute bedrock of civilization. Why? Because for the first time on this scale, not everyone had to be a farmer. And that one simple fact changed everything.
Because once people were free to do other things, society started to get layered. A complex social structure began to take shape. At the very top, you had your priests and kings, the people running the show. In the middle, you had skilled workers, merchants, craftsmen, artisans, alongside the farmers. And down at the bottom were enslaved people who were often prisoners captured in wars. This kind of social pyramid is a classic sign of a complex civilization.
Next up, you need a system of government to keep all of this organized. And in Sumer, kings emerged to do just that. They were in charge of everything, enforcing laws, collecting taxes, making sure those vital irrigation canals were kept clear, and, really importantly, leading the army to defend the city-state.
The Sumerians also had a really powerful religious system that sort of acted like the glue holding their society together. They worshipped many gods, and they believed their kings were chosen by those gods. At the heart of their cities, they built these massive temples called ziggurats, which they might have believed were like stairways for the gods to come down to earth.
And this new, stable social order became an absolute powerhouse of innovation. They created incredible art and world-changing technology. They developed music, using beautiful instruments like the lyre. In their architecture, they created the arch, which made their buildings stronger and more beautiful. But their most revolutionary tech? It has to be the wheel. First, they used it flat for potters to shape clay, but then they turned it on its side, and you've got wheels for carts and chariots, a total game changer.
And finally, the last big checkmark for a civilization, a highly developed written language. The Sumerians developed one of the very first, called cuneiform. They used a special stylus to press these little wedge-shaped marks into wet clay tablets. It was originally invented just to record business deals and keep track of things, but it ended up letting them store knowledge and pass it down for generations.
So when you step back and look at the whole picture, you see this incredible pattern. The Sumerians didn't set out to build a civilization. They were just trying to solve a series of really serious life-or-death problems. But in the process of doing that, in figuring out food and water and defense, they accidentally built a world that had all the hallmarks of a true civilization.
This timeline really just puts their achievement into perspective. I mean, look at the speed of this transformation. In just a couple of thousand years, they went from being struggling farmers on these empty plains to living in sophisticated, walled-in cities with writing, government, and advanced technology. It's just staggering.
And this isn't just some dusty old history lesson. Why does this matter to us? Because their solutions became our solutions. The wheel they invented, the very idea of writing things down, the concept of having written laws to govern a society, these are all foundational pillars of our modern world. It's a direct legacy from the Sumerians. Which, of course, leaves us with one final big thought to chew on. The Sumerians built their incredible world by solving the great problems of their time. So it kind of makes you wonder, right? What are the major challenges we're tackling right now, in technology, in society, in our environment, that will end up being the things that define the civilizations of the future?